Star Wars 7x7, episode 2847. We're continuing a series of looks at movie mistakes in the sequel era movies, or I guess I should say the Disney era movies, because they're not all sequel era taking place. This one is, though, and there's a bit of a fascinating wrinkle that's developed on MovieMistakes.com about this. It's about The Last Jedi, and we're going to dive right in. Punch it! Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy, and thank you so much for joining me for it. So just to give you the quick recap, many years ago in the early days of the podcast, I did episodes looking at movie mistakes from the original trilogy era and the prequel trilogy era, things that were just, not quite right in the Star Wars movies. Like, for example, in Return of the Jedi, there are places where you can't see the eyes in the Ewok masks. It's really creepy when you see some of them. They're like, ugh, yeah, crazy. So MovieMistakes.com is a site with a lot of user-generated content where people are uploading instances of mistakes that they found in all kinds of movies, including the Star Wars movies. They fall under things like continuity or character or factual or plot holes or things revealed, like equipment caught in frame, for example, or audio issues, things like that. So today we're going to look at The Last Jedi, and there are 26 documented mistakes about that one, which makes it less than half of the number of mistakes that were documented for The Force Awakens. However, the interesting thing about the mistakes for The Last Jedi is that there are conversations that happen around these mistakes, and I hadn't seen this with any of the other Star Wars movies that I looked at for these movie mistakes, but there are situations where people are replying to the mistakes as they're presented and explaining why they should not be marked as mistakes on the site. There are, in fact, 15 corrected mistakes. In other words, there had been 15 mistakes, I guess, that had been proposed where people responded and said, no, this is legit, and enough people upvoted the no, this is legit responses where it got kicked off of the correction or off of the mistakes page and onto the corrections page. So before you get to where I think you might be going, because I went there, seems like a fairly obvious thing, it does not seem like there is a lot of that kind of conversation around these movie mistake things. Like, there are a couple, little snarky things about, this is a plot hole or something like that. But largely, this is not made part of that whole crazy foo-for-ah that happened. Maybe one or two remarks here and there. But yeah, for the most part, it's actually very, very refreshingly free of that. As far as the issues themselves, nothing necessarily is really going to jump out at you like what we've talked about before. But one of the things that, I felt like you could possibly explain it away, but maybe not. But when Luke and R2-D2 are inside the Millennium Falcon and R2 plays the recording of Princess Leia from A New Hope, and Luke says, that's a dirty trick, R2 rotates his head to kind of look at Luke as he says that. But that's where he's projecting Princess Leia's hologram from. And so when you see the hologram again, it looks like it's in the same place on the floor. So R2, in turning his head, should have actually put Princess Leia hologram in a different place, and yet it was still right where it was. There are also a couple of flipping issues, but definitely nowhere near the level that there are in the Force Awakens. Like, Rey's blaster on her hip goes from one side to the other, like that sort of thing. But there are some other things too that I feel like are not necessarily explained. And I talked about this a little bit yesterday, where it's almost like montagey, and so you can't necessarily assume that, it's one thing and then the other and it's a mistake. Like, for example, there was a mistake suggested where when Rey is practicing her saber work with that giant rock, she seems to be very close to it at one point and then suddenly is much farther away from it at another point. But yeah, I didn't necessarily take that as a mistake. I felt like that was just more training montage where she's up close to it, then she's back away from it, that sort of thing. So yeah, I don't know how stringent you have to be with these definitions in order to get them on the website. There's one that I remembered seeing in the theater and thinking to myself, okay, did that just happen? And like questioning myself when I saw it the first time, and then seeing it in the home presentation, I was like, okay, yeah, that was the case when Finn drops his backpack outside of the escape pod shuttle, and then suddenly the backpack is magically inside the escape pod. So yeah, he never moves it there because he's too busy talking to Rose. So yeah, that's one where I was like, oh yeah, I actually caught one myself. That was pretty amazing. There are a couple of small detail things that, once you see them are pretty obvious. Like at one point near the end of the movie, Rey's injuries from her fight with Kylo and the Praetorian seem to have dried up and crusted, but then she has a moment with Kylo Ren in that last connection thing where suddenly it's open and weeping again. So yeah, suddenly it's back going. There's a thing about the rocks at the end though that I was kind of like, I don't know how I feel about that. So the rocky area where they escape out in the back of that cave on Crate, the boulders that Rey lifts definitely don't look like the rest of the topography there, and they also appear kind of smooth when they're being levitated up by her, but then when you see them crash, they actually look a little bit rougher, and I don't know if that's just because of the crash or if it's just different CGI or if it's the focus thing or what the deal is, but yeah, they definitely look a lot smoother comparatively when they're first being lifted up by Rey as they emerge from the back of that tunnel compared to all the landscape around them otherwise. And there's a thing about how, I guess, Finn goes up to one of the gambling tables and then there's, a quick switch of a shot and then suddenly when they're back with him, it's an entirely different set of people. I don't know if that just means people can rotate out or through. I don't know. One thing that was not mistake related though, but that I thought was actually very funny, and I had never heard this presented before, but there was a note about how Finn and Rose get in trouble with parking enforcement laws, and that a similar thing happened to the heroes in Spaceballs. And if that was intentional, then oh my gosh, that was so ridiculously subtle and brilliant. And that's pretty much all of the big notable things that people have captured as movie mistakes in The Last Jedi. Not a heck of a lot, as it turns out, and thankfully, just blissfully, it wasn't a horrible morass of comments about the movie itself. It really was limited to things where people thought, okay, this is a continuity error, this is a factual error, there's something physically wrong here. It's not anything to do with judgments and criticisms about the movie or anything like that. So that was really great to encounter. And that right there is what I've got for you for today's episode of the show. It just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for it, as always. And may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2021 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.